You did everything they said. You journaled, meditated, forgave, let go. You faced your demons, cleaned the emotional wounds, silenced the noise. And for a while, it felt like you had finally made it. You were calm, you were in control, you were healed. But then something strange happened. The noise disappeared, and what remained was silence. Not peace, not clarity, just silence. A cold, empty room inside your chest where something used to live. Not fear, not pain, but also not joy, not meaning, not hunger, just stillness. Stillness that feels like death wearing a smile. You are not breaking down anymore, but you are not truly alive either. You look in the mirror and see someone composed, functional, but the spark behind the eyes, gone. You go through the motions, you smile at the right times, but inside, there's a quiet ache that you can't name, a sense that something is missing, and worse, maybe it's you. This is the part no one warns you about. They tell you healing is the goal, that if you just fix the damage, happiness will return. But Carl Jung saw through that illusion. He knew that healing does not always lead to light. Sometimes, it leads to emptiness, because when the false self collapses and the shadow is faced, you are not left with peace, you are left with space. And space, before it becomes freedom, feels like death. So, if you have done the work and still feel numb, if you have faced your darkness and now feel hollow, you're not broken. You're just entering the part of healing that no one dares to speak about. And it's here, in this silence, that Carl Jung's darkest truth begins to unfold. Modern self-help has sold you a lie, a comforting one, polished, marketable, and easy to digest. It tells you that healing is a destination, that once you let go of the past, once you raise your vibration, once you've journaled enough, or meditated enough, or spoken your truth enough, then you'll arrive at peace, at happiness, at a life that finally feels good again. But what if that feeling never comes? What if you do all the right things and still feel hollow? Still wake up wondering what the point is? Still sense that something essential has gone missing? The truth is, most self-help doesn't prepare you for what happens after the healing, because the goal it sells you is comfort, not consciousness. Safety, not wholeness. Carl Jung saw this illusion clearly. To him, healing was never about relief. It was about confrontation, not with your past, not even with your pain, but with the structure of your identity itself. Because here's the terrifying truth. You can make peace with your childhood. You can process your trauma. You can forgive the people who hurt you, and still be living a lie. Why? Because healing the wound doesn't mean you found the self that was buried beneath it. It just means the pain isn't screaming anymore. And when the pain stops screaming, the silence that remains can feel like clarity. But it can also be a trap Jung called false integration. When you mistake emotional relief for inner transformation. When you confuse feeling better with being whole. When you wear your growth like a mask, calm on the outside, fractured underneath. You've learned how to manage life, how to function, how to keep things together, but you haven't yet faced the terrifying question. Who is the you that survived all this healing? What happens when the tools stop working? When the rituals feel empty? When peace feels sterile and joy feels out of reach? That's not failure. That's the edge of something deeper. The part of the journey where most people turn back, or worse, pretend they've arrived. But Jung didn't stop there. He pushed through the illusion, and what he found was not the end of suffering, but the beginning of truth. Real healing, Jung believed, isn't about escaping the darkness. It's about descending into it, without losing your soul. And if you're still feeling lost, maybe that's not because you're off the path. Maybe it's because you're finally on it. You were told to face your shadow, so you did. You dug into your past. You confronted the rage, the jealousy, the guilt. You admitted things you spent years hiding. You pulled back the mask and looked into the thing beneath it. And for a brief moment, there was clarity. You saw your darkness, and it saw you back. No more pretending, no more filters. Just you, raw, unresolved, and terrifyingly real. That moment is powerful. It feels like a breakthrough, like something ancient has cracked open inside you. But what they don't tell you is what happens after the confrontation, after the catharsis, after the big aha moment where you name your demons and stand in your truth. What happens next is this: you begin to fall apart. Not externally, not in a dramatic movie scene kind of way, but internally, quietly, slowly, like a structure that realizes it no longer makes sense. Because once the shadow is exposed, the identity built on avoiding it can no longer survive. Carl Jung called the shadow everything you've disowned, every trait, emotion, and instinct you repressed in order to be accepted. It's not just your darkness, it's your rejected wholeness. And facing it doesn't make you feel powerful, it makes you feel lost. Because when you reintegrate the parts you once denied, you don't just gain something, you lose something too. You lose the false self, the personality you spent years perfecting, the role you played to survive. The mask that once protected you now begins to choke you. And that's where most people panic. Because no one told them that facing the shadow doesn't just unlock truth, it undoes identity. You thought you'd come out stronger, but instead you feel disoriented, detached, alien even to yourself. You try to go back to the old life, but it doesn't fit anymore. You try to connect with old people, but they feel distant. You try to explain what you're going through, but no one really gets it. It feels like a breakdown, like something is collapsing, and it is. But collapse is not the enemy. Collapse is the initiation. Jung believed that to become whole, your old self must shatter. That healing is not about improving the mask, but about destroying it completely. And when it begins to crumble, you'll feel hollow. Not because you're failing, but because you're finally making space for what was never allowed to exist. This stage isn't pretty. It isn't Instagrammable. There are no quick tips or motivational quotes that can save you from it, because this is the death of the illusion, and every death feels like failure until you realize what it's clearing the way for. So if you feel like you're falling apart after shadow work, you're not doing it wrong. You're finally doing it for real. There's a strange feeling that creeps in after healing, a kind of detachment that's hard to name. You're no longer reactive. You're no longer triggered by the same people or patterns. You've stopped chasing validation. You've outgrown your old wounds. And yet, you feel distant from everything. Your conversations feel rehearsed. Your relationships feel shallow. You walk through your life like a character you've outgrown, performing roles that no longer make sense. You're not broken, you're not depressed, but you feel fake, like you're watching yourself from a distance. Carl Jung predicted this. He called it the conflict between the persona and the self. The persona is the mask you wear for the world. It's the version of you that fits in, performs well, follows the rules, and earns approval. It's not a lie, but it's not the whole truth either. It's a carefully edited version of you, optimized for survival. But then you begin healing. You confront the parts of yourself you once buried. You reclaim your shadow, your instincts, your voice. And suddenly, the persona no longer fits. It feels tight, unnatural, even absurd. You smile when expected, but it feels hollow. You laugh at jokes, but don't really feel them. You talk about things you used to care about, but now they sound scripted. And here's the most disorienting part. You don't know who the real you is anymore. The mask is cracked, but the self hasn't fully emerged. You're in limbo. Jung said the self is not something you perform, it's something you become. But to become it, you must first lose everything that isn't it. That means losing the personality you thought was you, losing the roles you built your worth around, losing the labels, the identities, the polished image. And what's left? Silence, space, a blank slate that feels terrifying because, for the first time, you don't know who to be. You realize that most of your life was a performance, not out of malice, but necessity. You became what was safe, what was praised, what was familiar. But now that the mask has slipped, you can't unsee the truth. You were never fully there. This is why you feel detached, not because something's wrong with you, but because you're no longer willing to betray yourself just to be accepted. You're not fake, you're just unfinished. The detachment isn't a flaw. It's a sign of separation between who you were and who you're becoming. It's painful, it's disorienting, but it's also sacred, because in that emptiness, the self begins to stir, not loudly, not with clarity, but with a quiet sense that you don't need to play the role anymore. You're ready to meet what's beneath it. And that's where the real journey begins. You thought you had evolved. You faced your pain, you met your shadow, you let go of the illusion, and for a while, you felt free, light, awake, like something sacred had opened inside you. But then came the crash. Not dramatic, not chaotic, just strange, subtle, creeping. A feeling of hollowness began to return. Not the same as before, something quieter, but more disturbing. As if the you that felt awakened was suddenly slipping away. You start asking questions again. Am I regressing? Was that peace just temporary? Why do I feel more disconnected now? This is the moment most people mistake for failure. But Carl Jung warned us. This is not regression. This is psychic inflation. The ego's silent revenge. Jung described psychic inflation as what happens when your ego identifies with something greater than itself, your soul, your shadow work, your transformation, and then tries to possess it. It's when the ego says, I've awakened, I've transcended, I've faced my darkness, I must be whole now. But the ego isn't gone. It's just wearing a new costume, a spiritual one, a wise one, a healed one. And underneath that costume, it's terrified. Because it no longer controls the narrative. It no longer defines your identity. It's no longer at the center of your life. So it fights back, but not with anger, with emptiness. The ego doesn't scream anymore. It withdraws. It lets you feel hollow. Number disoriented. Not because you've lost your path, but because your ego is losing its throne. And make no mistake, this is dangerous territory. Because this is the point where most people relapse. They misinterpret the emptiness as a sign something's wrong. They believe they've made a mistake, so they go back to the comfort, the roles, the mask. They reach for distraction, for validation, for some feeling of normal again. But what they're really doing is rescuing the ego. Jung called this a psychic defense mechanism. The ego convinces you that peace without it isn't real, that the silence you feel is not expansion, but loss. And if you believe it, you'll rebuild the illusion. You'll reattach to an identity that's just another mask, more spiritual, perhaps, but still false. But if you endure it, if you stay present inside the hollowness, if you resist the urge to make it mean something negative, you'll realize something profound. That feeling of nothing isn't the absence of life, it's the absence of illusion. It's what's left when the ego stops speaking, and at first, it feels like death. But it's not death, it's a beginning. The part of you that needed control is dissolving, and what replaces it isn't noise, it's depth, it's presence, it's truth, untouched by performance. So, if you feel hollow after healing, maybe it's not that you're broken, maybe it's that your ego has finally stepped aside, and now something real is preparing to take its place. There's a place on the other side of healing that no one talks about. It doesn't come with breakthroughs. It doesn't feel powerful. It doesn't feel like anything at all. It's called the dead zone. You wake up and you feel nothing. Not sadness, not joy, just blank. You're not overwhelmed anymore, but you're also not moved. Music doesn't touch you. Books don't inspire you. Your old distractions feel meaningless, but the things you should care about don't land either. You look around at your life, the people, the plans, the things you work so hard for, and all of it feels far away, like you're watching from behind glass. This is the stage that terrifies people, because it doesn't feel like pain, it feels like absence, like something vital inside you went quiet, like the soul just stepped out. Jung never romanticized this stage. He called it what it is, a spiritual winter, the psyche retreating inward, the ego collapsing, but the self not yet fully formed. You're no longer who you were, but not yet who you're becoming. And in that in-between space, you feel emotionally dead. Most people try to escape this zone. They chase intensity. They blame themselves for feeling numb. They seek new relationships, dopamine hits, or external change, because feeling nothing is more terrifying than feeling pain. At least pain means you're alive. But numbness, it feels like a void swallowing you whole. But what if this isn't death? What if this is gestation? The seed doesn't bloom the moment it breaks from its shell. It sits in the dark, unseen, silent, becoming. and so do you. This isn't the failure of your healing. It's the proof that it's working, because something in you has been stripped bare. The defenses, the performance, the urgency, and now you're face to face with nothing. But nothing is not the end. It's the space required for something new to emerge. Jung said the path to wholeness doesn't always feel like growth. Sometimes it feels like dying. Not literal death, but the death of the ego's illusions, the death of compulsions, the death of needing to be someone. So if you're walking through a numb, silent, empty stage of your healing journey, don't turn back, don't fill it, don't run from it. Feel it, because this isn't your soul abandoning you. It's your soul preparing to rearrange you. And just like winter, this isn't where the story ends. It's where the roots go deeper. Stillness doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means everything is happening, just beneath the surface. There's a lie we keep telling ourselves, that finding our true self will feel good, that becoming whole will bring lightness, clarity, peace, that once we integrate the darkness, the reward will be joy. But Carl Jung warned us, individuation is not joyful, it's brutal. Because becoming whole doesn't mean becoming happy, it means becoming real. And reality, when you've been living inside illusion, feels like pain. Individuation is the process of integrating every rejected part of yourself. Not just the wounds, but the rage you suppressed, the desires you denied, the truths you couldn't say out loud. It means breaking from the roles you were praised for. It means losing the identity you worked your whole life to build. It means looking at your life and realizing how much of it was a mask. And that realization doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like grief. Because to become who you are, you have to mourn who you were. You lose people. You lose comfort. You lose belonging in places that once felt like home. You find yourself sitting in rooms that no longer feel safe, surrounded by friends who don't know how to talk to you anymore. You try to go back to the old conversations, the old habits, the old roles, but they feel foreign, like clothes that no longer fit. You thought waking up would feel like enlightenment. Instead, it feels like loneliness, because the deeper you go into yourself, the more you realize how little of yourself the world has ever seen, and how few people are ready to meet that version of you. This is the paradox of true inner growth. You become stronger, but you feel weaker. You become clearer, but you feel more lost. You become more authentic, but also more alone. Not because you're broken, but because you're stepping into a self that doesn't rely on external scaffolding. No more approval, no more pretending. No more shrinking to fit into lives that were never built for your depth. Jung believed that this collapse, this chaos, this dismantling was not a detour from the path. It was the path. The self, in Jung's words, is not found. It's forged through contradiction, through fire, through loss. And if it hurts, if you feel like you're breaking down, if your life feels like it's unraveling, you're not doing it wrong. You're finally coming into contact with what's real. You're stepping beyond the false piece of comfort and into the raw, chaotic wholeness of truth. And that's not joyful. That's not light. It's terrifying. It's disorienting. It's sacred. Because this pain isn't the end. It's the cost of becoming you. We're taught to associate healing with fullness, with joy, completion, overflowing peace. But when you finally reach what Jung called wholeness, you don't feel full. You feel exposed. Because true healing doesn't armor you. It removes the armor, piece by piece, layer by layer, until there's nothing left but the raw, unfiltered version of you. And that version, it doesn't come with fireworks or enlightenment. It comes with silence. A silence that most people confuse for emptiness. Because when the illusions collapse, when the identities, the beliefs, the roles, the ego games all fall away, what's left feels like nothing. You're not being praised anymore. You're not performing anymore. You're not chasing or hiding or fixing. You're just there, fully present, and terrifyingly open. And that openness at first feels like a void, like something went missing, like something's wrong. But Jung would say, nothing's missing. What you're feeling isn't emptiness. It's the absence of noise. It's the space that gets revealed once the internal war is over. It's not the presence of lack. It's the disappearance of illusion. But the ego doesn't know how to live in silence. It panics when there's nothing to control. It interprets stillness as death. and screams for something, anything, to fill the void. That's why so many people sabotage their healing. Not because they're weak, but because they mistake truth for absence. But here's the paradox. Jung understood. Wholeness in its early stages doesn't feel like empowerment. It feels like being unguarded, stripped bare, naked in the face of reality. It feels like standing in the ruins of who you used to be before anything new has grown. But that space, that aching silence, isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning. Because only in that silence can something real start to grow. Not a role, not a mask, not a socially acceptable version of self, but you. Raw, unedited, undeniable. So, if you've reached the point in your healing where you no longer feel full, don't panic. You're not failing. You're just finally feeling what wholeness actually is, space. And in that space, truth has room to breathe. If you've endured the silence, if you've walked through the numbness, the dead zone, the loss of identity, something strange begins to happen. Not all at once, not in some glorious revelation, but slowly, quietly, meaning begins to return. But it's not the kind of meaning you used to chase. It doesn't come through validation, not through dopamine highs, applause, or achievement. It's not the kind of meaning that gets you followers or makes you feel successful. It's something far more subtle. You notice it in small moments, in the way you feel when you choose truth over performance, when you say no without guilt, when you sit in solitude and don't need to escape. It's the kind of meaning that grows like roots, not fireworks. It's quiet, stable, and internal. Carl Jung believed that meaning doesn't arrive from the outside. It must be born within, through suffering, through honesty, through integration. That's why it feels so different, because it wasn't handed to you. You earned it. But here's the twist. The moment meaning begins to return is usually the same moment pain starts to rise again. Not because something is wrong, but because you're finally alive again. You're no longer numbing. You're no longer hiding. You're beginning to feel again, and that includes the ache of everything you once buried. But that ache isn't a flaw. It's a signal. It's the soul stretching, reawakening, making space for something authentic. Most people misinterpret pain as a sign they've taken a wrong turn, but Jung saw it differently. To him, pain was not the enemy, pain was the compass. Not because it's noble or romantic, but because it means you're moving through something real. You're not distracting. You're not faking. You're not outsourcing your identity. You're becoming, and that process hurts. Not because you're broken, but because you're growing out of the skin that once kept you safe. So when meaning comes back, don't expect it to be loud. Expect it to be earned. Expect it to grow in the places you thought were dead. And if you feel pain along the way, take it as confirmation. Not that you've failed, but that, for the first time, you're finally on the right track. So maybe you don't feel whole. Maybe you don't feel awakened or empowered or enlightened. Maybe what you feel is nothing. Just a strange, lingering stillness, like something is missing, or something has left. But what if that emptiness isn't a sign you're broken? What if it's a sign you've begun? Carl Jung said that wholeness is not achieved by cutting off the darkness, but by integrating it. And integration isn't clean. It's not beautiful. It's not a sunrise moment. It's messy. It's violent. It strips you bare and asks you to rebuild, without the mask, without the noise, without the ego pretending to lead. And in that space, what feels like dead inside is actually the soul recalibrating. You're not failing. You're just stepping beyond the narrative that healing should feel good, that clarity should come quickly, that transformation should be glamorous. The truth is, real healing feels like death before it feels like rebirth. Not because you're weak, but because you're shedding an identity that was never yours to keep. You didn't fail at healing. You just crossed a threshold no one talks about. A place beyond the self-help cliches, beyond the shallow promises, beyond the comfort of knowing who you are. You've entered the void, and in that void, something ancient begins to stir. Not the you that fits in, not the you that survives, but the you that was waiting beneath all of it. So no, you're not dead inside. You're being reborn inside. This emptiness is not your flaw, it's your invitation to stop performing, to stop pretending, to stop filling every space that feels uncomfortable, and to finally let truth take root where illusion once lived. You're not broken. You're just becoming.